So he's coming over to tell us the history of how relational database management became what it is. And you can even ask him about the mysteries of the disappearance of Jim Gray. There's two big mysteries: Stephen Fawcett, the flyer, who got lost in Nevada, and Jim Gray, who went on his boat and never was seen again a year and a half ago. Anyway, so that's next week. This week I have the honor and pleasure of introducing Markus Jakobsson, who did his undergraduate work at Lund Institute in Sweden, then came to the United States and got his master's and PhD at the University of California, San Diego. And in between, he had all kinds of other activities. He worked for Bell Labs, he taught at Indiana University, at New York University. He founded some mysterious company called Raven White. Now, if you have seen a raven, they're typically black, but this was Raven White. I urge everybody to visit the site, Security Cartoon, which is a fun site to visit. And I looked deep in the FBI files, and I found that Markus had a great grand-uncle, and he used to tell Markus whenever he went to school, he said, "Markus, you have a lunch, and then make sure to remember the passwords." So today, Markus is going to tell us what's going on with password fatigue. So let's welcome Markus.
So I wanted to start by asking you guys how many of you have ever forgotten passwords. Good. So we know what we're talking about. It's not such an uncommon problem once you forget your password. And of course, as there are more and more websites out there, more and more passwords out there, you have two choices. Either you use the same password everywhere, that's not such a good idea, or you forget passwords even more. So it's not a problem about to go away. It's a problem, though, that everybody out there with a website and a password managing system feels like they understand it. But there's been no scientific study of the problem so far. People ask you questions, and if you answer them correctly, they say it must be you, and then they admit you and let you change your password. That's a little bit of a scary thought, when that is how you decide who is who out there, and either admit people or do not admit people to resources that whose use or abuse could be rather critical. So this is the first attempt at looking at password reset in a scientific point of view. But this is not a pure computer science exercise where we can forget about the human in the loop. That's all too common among nerds, unfortunately. We need to realize that if there are passwords involved, there are also humans involved. So anybody who would feel like, who would suggest that substitute passwords with SSL certificates and that anybody remember their SSL key and things like that, forget it. That's not for humans. None of us would like to do that. So this is tackling the problem in a scientific way, but still remembering who's the end user. And I'm going to let the title remain a mystery for a while, but explain it later. The authentication part, of course, you understand that it's about authenticating yourself to the system. It should actually have said backup authentication, because the normal authentication is the password, but now you've forgotten it. So what happens when you typically forget your password? There are two ways, right, of doing it. Either you get a link or you have to answer some questions. Which one do you think is the most safe? Which one?
Getting a link.
Getting a link? How's that?
Because other people can guess the questions, but getting a link that goes to an email account that has been previously confirmed as yours.
It's true that the account probably does belong to you, but what if it also belongs to a fisher? So I'm sure you've seen lots of websites out there who ask for your Gmail password in order to sign up all your friends or to import your address book or something like that. There are also phishing sites out there that ask for your Gmail password. And of course, as soon as you got somebody's Gmail password, you got all their all reset emails, but you also get access to all their new reset emails. So this is actually, it appears to be a safe thing, but it's not such a great approach. On the other hand, the questions, it's not such a good idea either. So we're in a bad situation, and this is where we're starting. And by the way, you could, after the talk, if you want to get more information about how it works and try a demo, you could go to I forgot my password, I'll hyphenate it. And my webpage, which is my name, with a hyphen between first and last name, has more information about this and also other publications. And as George mentioned before, I do have a startup on the side, and this is actually the property of the startup. The name of the startup is Raven White, and that's one word. And if you go to ravenwhite.com, you will see more of the projects and the philosophy of that company. So, first of all, we need to understand whether this is a problem that's going to take care of itself or not. And I think it's very evident that it isn't. This is a problem that's going to get worse before it gets any better. There are more sites, there are more passwords, and therefore there's more forgetting. If you repeat your credentials, that is a bad thing. The best approach would really be OpenID. OpenID is a way that you link all of your credentials together to one place that provides your credentials. So instead of logging in with the username and the password, you really log in with a URL. The URL links back to a place where you keep your username and credentials, and that place sends over information saying, yes, he is who he claims to be, or he's okay, and so on. And you can have various policies there. But how does that place know that it's you? Well, they know that it's you because you have a cookie on your machine or something like that, and they recognize, and they send you to that site that it's your machine. What if you erase your cookie? Well, then they'll ask you for your password. Now here's the problem. This is a password that you use every 5 months, maybe. You will have forgotten that one. That's the same problem as, but not quite as severe as was with companies like Fidelity, other 401k retirement service providers face. Average people do not log into their retirement accounts more than every 2 or 3 years, typically when they change their photos. You will have forgotten your password, unless you choose a totally dumb password. And you could quantify the problem, actually, by looking at the economic side of it. There's a black market for credentials. If you're interested in buying passwords or Visa card numbers, everything like that, there's a black market for it. Go to websites where there are auctions. The criminals, the people who sell them, they have reputations, just like eBay sellers. You could leave feedback. It's a system that works much better, in fact, than some of the legitimate systems out there. And there you could buy passwords. You could also buy passwords plus the answers to the password reset questions. For one large financial service provider that I'm working with every once in a while, you could buy credentials for $1 a piece. That's the password only. But if you want the password reset questions, it costs $15. The industry average is about a multiple 10. Why is it that it costs so much more if you buy the password reset questions?
That's a one-time deal.
Not a one-time deal. You could use it even if I change my password. I'm very unlikely to have been born somewhere else someday. So they stay. It's a meta password. It stays over time. It also stays between sites. It's a cross-site password. If the 2 different sites use the same password, reset questions, like what's the high school you graduated from, that's a common password. If I buy it for one site, well, I bought it for another site too. That's the reason why it costs much more to buy the enhanced credentials. And this is a sign of the problem, really. It's a tremendous market to obtain these credentials, to obtain the password reset questions, because you could sell them for 10 to 15 times more than you could the password. So here's a couple of typical questions. Name of sister's best friend, mother's maiden name, name of your high school, city of birth, make of your first car, name of first pet, driver's license number. Now, which one's the worst of these? What do you think? Mother's maiden name is pretty bad. In fact, I did a study with one of my students where we determined with certainty mother's maiden names for people from the state of Texas. We got 15% of the people with certainty, and another 10 to 15%, we only have 2 or 3 choices. It's using public records, the birth records and the marriage records, which uniquely define a large portion of the population's mother's maiden name. Now, the state of Texas has nothing particular about it in this sense. In fact, we chose it because it isn't particular. It's much more similar to the U.S. average in terms of demographics than California's. We could have done it in California. We could have done it in any state. My student had some beef with the state of Texas too, and that was another example. But so we should expect that this is really the average problem. Now, what's the second worst? City of birth. City of birth is pretty bad. Now, I don't know about you, but I think a good guess would be LA, San Francisco, New York City, maybe Chicago, for an average person that you don't know. But for a person that you do know something about, you might know the last name only, and you could search public records such as the white pages. You might get all the relatives, parents even. You can get a pretty good guess. So that's not a very good one either. Any other lousy ones?
High school.
High school is a bad one. High schools have very predictable names. But that's not the only problem. You're likely to go to high school where you grew up. And you're more likely than not to still live in that area. And if there are any records whatsoever about a person and where that person grew up, you have a pretty good guess of where that person went to high school. So that's not good. Any others?
My sister's best friend.
What's that about?
Facebook.
Facebook. And I don't have a sister. So for me, it's a lousy question. But also, even if you were to not have access to Facebook, well, you could just guess a common name. Joe or George or Jim or something like that. And you got a pretty good chance. So, are there any good ones here? First pet. First pet, you might argue, you don't put on Facebook. It takes a pretty strange person to put the name of the first pet on Facebook. And no insult to anybody here. But it's also a predictable thing. There are actually records of most common pet names available online. That's a good guess. You could also call it vet, if you know the name of the person you want to attack, and say, you know, I'm the dog walker for this person. Actually, I forgot the name of the dog, but I'd like to make an appointment. And dog groomer's the same. It's not so hard.
But first pet would be like, could be 20, 30 years ago.
That's true.
Record.
That's true, but then you go for the average. But that's it. That's a decent. How about any others?
Like driver's license number, I'm wondering if that's confidential information. Or
Not if you ever get a moving violation. And it's searchable online. And in some states, actually, it's funny, your social security number, which some people might argue is a great question, it's just a constant offset of your driver's license number, or vice versa, actually. Driver's license number is your social security number plus a constant. Used to be the case in Arizona. So if you got anybody's driver's license number there from a few years ago, you also got their social security number. Not so good. But also, of course, if lots of places ask for these questions, you have to register with some of these to your bank. And then you come to my website, and I ask you some of these, I'll ask you exactly the ones that I hope that your bank will use. I've got the answers. I don't need to guess them. So, no matter what you do, most of these, after all, are pretty horrible in one way or another. And there are other ones. Data mining is one way to go if you want to attack. Make up your first car. Well, don't guess Bentley. Guess something common. First name of best friend, guess something common too. Or, look it up if you can. Name of first of favorite pets. You look online and hope for frequent statistics. And you should remember, you don't have to get all of these right. For example, for PayPal, you have to get 2 out of 3 right. Alright? So if you can get this one right, no problem. And mother's maiden name, as I mentioned, it's the paper that I referred to, Massillville, Texas. Here's another problem though. People forget. Name of the first street. Well, you might argue that you won't forget what the name of the first street you grew up on was, but you might forget your representation of it. Did you spell it out as street, S-T-R-R-E-E-T, or S-T? Or was it road? That matters. Because it's verbatim match. Is the matter. And it might be that you grew up on more than one street. Now, you might remember all of these streets that you grew up on, but which one was it that you told during registration? Name of the best guy. Things change. Also, something that many people, of course, among my friends, they might know and have good guesses. So this is a somewhat public fact. Facebook, again, doesn't help here. City where you're born. Here's the representation problem again. Is it NYC, New York, New York City, Manhattan, the Big Apple? Or did I even misspell when I registered? Then I'm in deep trouble. And then you get people who think they're smart. Most detectives who say, well, I lied. Asked by the name of the city I grew up on, the name of the street I grew up on, I say Jim. Or I say my mother's maiden name to everything. Whatever. But then you forget, what exactly did I say on this site? Was it the same I said on the other site? And remember, you are facing the problem of password reset because you already forgotten something. Why should we trust that you do not forget this other secret that you use so much more rarely now that you're already stressed because you forgot the first thing that you use often? Don't lie. Not a good thing. This is the curve that I'm very pleased to have in here because it's the oldest citation I've ever had. It's in 1885. It's a citation of a German psychologist's work when he looks at how people forget. And these different curves correspond to different degrees of meaningless information. So something that is very, very, very pointless to you, you will forget quickly. Whereas something that is more meaningful, you'll forget it slower. This is some kind of average over the population and over time, of course. Now, a good password, of course, should be meaningless. So, by nature of the password, you should forget it very quickly. That proves that it's a good password. So, recently there was published a taxonomy of problems. This is a nice, not technical paper to read to understand exactly what the problems are. One type of problems is it's inapplicable. So, what high school did your spouse attend? Well, maybe I'm not married. Or if I am, maybe my spouse did not attend high school. So there are some questions that have no answer. Not memorable. Name of teacher in kindergarten. I'm not teaching. I'm not kidding you. This is a rather common question. Now, how many people here know the name of their kindergarten teacher? Man, you're young. I sure do not. They're ambiguous questions. Like, name of college you pledged to but did not attend. If you pledged to 10 colleges, well, 9 of them you did not attend. Which one was it that you registered? So, on the surface, this seems like a great question because there would be no public record of this. But it's a horrible question. And then there are guessable questions. Age when you married. Well, if you are married to begin with, most people don't marry when they're 13, except in Kentucky. 25 is a pretty good guess. 26 is good. 65 now. So you get a pretty good guess. That means the entropy of the answer is very low. There's very little surprise in the answer. So the adversary, of course, would have an easy time coming up with a good guess. Similarly, favorite color. Most people stick to normal colors, not like rust blue. You know, that's not a common choice for this. It would be a color that, you know, uncommon 5, 6 colors. Very low entropy again. And then they're attackable and automatic attackable questions. This is actually what many financial service providers use. They say, did you ever live on this street, or that street, or this street, or that street? Or none of them. Now, if you have access to the white pages, and you know the name of the person you're trying to impersonate, you get a pretty good shot at this. Not good at all. Actually, when I called Fidelity recently in order to reset my password, the fact that I'm doing research on password doesn't mean I won't forget mine. And they asked me all these questions. Of course, I was fuming because anybody could learn this, and I thought that it would be a breeze though until I'm done with this, because I know the format and I can answer it quickly. It would be half a minute and I'd have access to my account. But no, they didn't. They said, sorry, you answered incorrectly. And I know I did not answer incorrectly. How do they get their questions? And how do they know their answers? They search public databases. And there was some error in these public databases. But the very fact that the way they get their data is to search public databases is kind of a hint why this might not be a good way to go. And then there are other constraints. For example, if you're going to type your mother's maiden name on an iPhone, it's not that much fun. And it's worse if you have a phone where in order to press C, you have to press number 1 button 3 times. It's not a good experience. So, and then of course, Americans with Disabilities Act would make it very hard to endorse many of these schemes. If you consider dyslexia as a disability, and it sure is in this context, perhaps favorite color, you could say that the colorblind have a disadvantage, but anyway, it's not easy to find a scheme that suits all and which is security. So here's the intuition. Don't use memory. Don't rely on people's memory. And the reason is actually because people forget. Instead, you use preferences. Your preferences aren't something you remember. They represent who you are. You don't have to remember when you wake up if you like cornflakes or not. You just know it. And so that's a personality question. And now I can reveal the name, the name of the talk, Love and Authentication. Because the questions we decided to use, we got them by scraping dating sites. We scraped them for all kinds of preferences. We looked around to figure where do people express who they are as opposed to what they can remember. Dating sites is the #1 place that collect information about who people are, where they believe they are, or where they like others people to think they are, in order to match people. They don't ask things that you probably have to remember. They want to know who is this person, so that they can create a match. So we scraped loads of online dating sites. We took all their questions, and then some of them were not very suitable at all with password reset. For example, do you like tattoos on the back? That would be a weird kind of question to reset your password. And also, there are even worse questions that you could never get away with to ask a large group of subjects in order to learn their preferences if you want IRB approval. IRB is the Institutional Review Board. There are questions that really don't want to go in. So we removed a lot of these questions that were just not suitable. And then we asked lots of people these questions. And some of the questions were unsuitable. Like, do you like to watch TV? Well, if 95% of the population say yes, what would the attacker guess? Yes. So it has to be questions where the answers are kind of polarizing. It would be about the same number of the portion of the population who said, yes, I like it, as the portion who said, no, I don't like this at all. Then it's hard to guess the answer. The benefit of using preferences is that they're relatively stable. You might argue that you change preferences over time, but not all of your preferences, you won't. And you'll see later on that it doesn't matter if you change a few preferences. And there's been research done, this is also a very old piece of research, looking into how stable are preferences. Also, preferences, not counting extreme preferences, are rather uncommonly documented. Now, extreme preferences would be something like favorite rock star that people might consider putting up on Facebook, or I hate broccoli. But do I slightly dislike cornflakes? You know, that's not the kind of thing that I blog about. Or I kind of like Mexican food. You know, big deal. I would just not write it. So, and especially dislikes. There are no purchase records that show that I do not like hip-hop. Ever. No? Because why would I, you know, if I might go and buy a rock album, and then there's some kind of, you know, there's a slip, there's a receipt, there's something that says I bought a rock album. But there's nothing out there floating around that says I did not buy a hip-hop album. So, dislikes are even less documented than likes. This is a look of the site where you register, and you could go and try it out later. It's called Blue Moon Authentication. Blue-moon-authentication.com. And the reason for that name is that we want it to be possible for a person to forget their password just once in a blue moon and still be able to access it. If you forget your password every day, you know, you will remember your password reset question and the answer. But if you only forget it every 2 years, you should still be able to gain access to the account. That's the reason for the name. But this is what you see when you get there. There are 6 categories: sports, places, music, food, TV, interests. For each one, and here's sports highlighted. You get a bunch of things. Doing yoga, skating, playing golf, and so on. You can press that you like something, in which case you send it to this part. Or you can press that you dislike something, in which case you send it to this part. Now your job during the setup phase is to put 8 topics here and 8 topics here. So you have to find 8 things that you like and 8 things that you do not like from these. And the order of all of these buttons here is going to be random. So it means if you come there, you're going to get a different view than if I come there. And if you come there twice, you're going to get a different view. And that means that we're not all going to see the same thing and all be tempted to choose the same things. Also, the actual topics that are displayed here are selected from a larger set of topics that you could have chosen if you had been shown. So there's a large number of possibilities. Anyway, you populate these 2 tables. Now remember, these aren't things that you were willing to die for. These are things that you kind of like and kind of dislike, and that makes people nervous. Because they would say, you know, I'm not sure I would know this later if I have to. But later, if you do forget your password and you go to the authentication step, this is what you're faced with. Cars, like or dislike. Watch soccer, like or dislike. Now, if you have a slight preference, you know, it's still very hard to mistake and think it's the other way. You know, if you kind of like cars, but you're not into, you know, you're going to all the car shows, but you're not one of those people out there protesting that cars exist. You probably think, you know, I kind of like cars. I like the design of cars. They're cool. And watching soccer, no, I've got better things to do. I don't care for soccer. But it's not something that you would scream if somebody made you watch soccer. So even though you have very slight preferences, on average, you would be able to answer these questions. Now, what if I used to like French food, and then I go to a French restaurant and I have a horrible experience, and from then on I cannot imagine eating snails or whatever. And I say, you know, French food, no, not for me. And I click dislike here, whereas I used to say like. Will I not be admitted? No, actually, that's not a problem. As long as I get 70% right, that's a threshold result, then you're considered to be you. that threshold can be set at different places, and I'll talk more about that later.
So do you need to fill out a complete survey to
Well,
be authenticated before
this is what, so
initially registering?
when you set up your account, this is what you fill out. That takes on average 2 minutes. So you don't have to answer all of these, whether you like them or dislike them. You have to say, you have to find 8 things you like and 8 things you dislike. That's all. It doesn't matter which ones. You don't have to find the ones that you like the most.
Do you have to select the same questions you did when you initially registered?
No, this is registration.
Yeah.
This is, and then the system will remember what you said, and they will ask, for this topic, it would be, the system would fail if this is what it looked like during registration and authentication. Because how could you remember which ones you chose?
Yeah.
But no, this is what you do during registration, this is what you do during authentication. So now you don't have to remember what your choices were, you just have to think hard. Do I enjoy reading comics or not? Hopefully you won't have to think that hard. You would know. And that's the reason we use preferences, of course. Yes?
So if I'm attacking this,
Yes.
am I correct in thinking I know 8 of those are going to be liked and 8 of them are going to be disliked?
Correct.
So if I take the first 8, I can basically, oh no, I can't quite ignore this. Never mind.
But you got something there.
I was making a bad combinatorial argument.
It's the combinatorial argument. If you only have combinatorics to rely on, I mean, guessing 8 out of 16, your chances of success are rather slim. In fact, they're better attacks, and I'll talk about that later. You want to have a success rate for the attacker that is below 1%. That's the industry standard. If you can make sure that only 1% or less of attempts are successful impersonating them, then that's good news. You might argue that 1%, that's a whole lot. But there's back-end security too. Back-end security means that the score that you get when you log in is going to be scrutinized very carefully, automatically of course, and said, well, it's kind of lower than usual, so maybe this is not a good one. So maybe we'll look at all the transactions onwards and see, are there any transfers of huge sums to Bulgaria? And that's a no-no. So there are other measures as well. But let me talk about that later. So under the hood here, this is how it works. When you authenticate, you get a small reward for each correct answer you give. So some number of points. And you get a much larger penalty each time you make a correct and an incorrect guess. And then the system just compares it to the threshold of the point that you should have gotten in order to view 70%, and say, is that enough or not? Now the size of these rewards and penalties actually is not the same for all questions. As you might have guessed, different questions have slightly different ease of being guessed. The question that is easy to guess, easier than others to guess, means that it has lower entropy. You think of the entropy as the degree of surprise you were told the answer. Rather small surprise, and it's rather easy to guess. Those count less. In fact, the points you get for each question that you get right corresponds to the entropy of the answers over the whole population for that question. Whereas the penalty you get if you get it wrong is a multiple of the entropy. So if you get something wrong and it's a very hard to guess question, well, you get penalized much more than if it's one that is easy. Yes. So now, before we can say that it's secure, we need to say secure against what? In fact, that's the most common problem among not so serious security practitioners, that they conclude something is secure without saying against what, and that makes it meaningless. So here are a bunch of potential adversaries. The first one is what I call the faceless enemy on the web, the phishing, for example. 2 guys, what we call the naive enemy. He will say, well, 16 things, I know 8 of them are going to be yes, 8 of them are going to be no. I don't know anything about distributions, I don't care. I'll just guess. 50% chance. Guesses. which ones would be yes, the other ones are no. That does not take into consideration any knowledge about the distributions of these questions. That's the strategic adversary. The strategic adversary is the adversary who goes out and performs a survey among people to figure out how common is it to like next to them, and then makes a guess according to that knowledge. Or you could say that it's a person who obtains insider information from a company that runs a service like this and learns the aggregates, the averages. Here's another one, an acquaintance, a friend, or a family member. We've tested it against all kinds of adversaries. This is an interesting one to do. What we did in order to test this was that we had a large user study where we had pairs of people. Some of them were acquaintances, some of them were friends, some of them were family members. And then we asked one person to set up a profile and the other one to guess the answers. Turns out that acquaintances actually are worse. They're not as good as attacking as these adversaries are. Right? Actually, it's very strange. You could say, well, they don't have the benefit of knowing all the statistics and the distribution, so they might be worse than this one. But they're also worse than this one. Because many of them didn't realize that they should take exactly 8. So they're not very good at this. Now friends, there are a whole range of success rates. Rather troubling, but they would also be a rather troubling enemy to the existing password reset schemes. We got success rates of about 10% for these people. And family members, you're doomed. But then again, you're doomed in the context of other password reset schemes too. Interesting, we performed this study. My wife knows me better than I do. She always claims that she does, but she actually does. Because she did not make any mistakes, and I made one mistake when I tried. We had a newly engaged couple who came in and took it, and we were very nervous because it turned out that they didn't know each other the least at all. They had no clue who the others were. And we didn't want to break the news to them, but that might not be a good thing. So there's a whole range, of course. So family members have a success rate of up to 95%. Now, this is not the typical enemy. And if you talk, even though it's actually interesting, it's the most common kind of non-synthetic identity theft. Now, let me start by defining synthetic identity theft. Synthetic identity theft is if I create a fake ID card with a name that is not mine, I go into a bank and open an account, I stay there for a little while, then I get a credit line there, I take out a huge loan, and then I disappear. That's synthetic identity theft. That's where the person who's defrauded, whose money disappears, never existed. Non-synthetic identity theft is where there's an actual person who's supposedly defrauded. And for some service providers like PayPal, non-synthetic identity theft by family members is more common than by non-family members. No? Somebody whom you know takes money from your account. But that's not the worrisome kind of attack to them. Because they will just say, well, it was shipped to this street, and you go, whoa, I know who that is. Mystery solved. No financial losses to the service provider. So this one, even though it's rather common, it's a tiny economical problem. Here, this is the issue. This is the big one. But we want to study, of course, all kinds of them. This is the worst attacker could imagine. The motivated, knowledgeable, evil attacker. I'm not going to talk about it. You imagine. And then there's another kind of attacker. We call it the website cloning attacker. Here's what you do. You would like to know my PayPal answers. You create a site. It doesn't look like PayPal. You're not trying to fish PayPal or anything. You create any kind of site. It could be news, it could be your blog, anything. You make me want to read whatever is on it. You say, okay, you need a password, and then of course you need to answer password reset questions. You take the same password reset questions as PayPal does. I give answers, thinking, oh, okay, same as usual, I have to give answers and so on. You got my answers. You got my meta password. That's the website cloning pattern. It doesn't actually clone the website, but it clones the questions. Now, we performed lots of experiments. That's the only way you can evaluate the success of this. To begin with, we asked a large number of college students about these dating questions. 193 questions went in. About 120 were kept. Those were the ones with good distributions and not unsuitable questions. Then we used more than 1,000 Amazon Mechanical Turk users. If you're not familiar with Amazon Mechanical Turk, I'm not going to go into much detail here. You can look at it afterwards. These are people who will perform tasks for you online for some kind of typically very small reward. And so we asked them to use the interface and rate topics. And then we emulated many users according to known distributions, and then we've actually performed further experiments after these slides were made. These are slides from about a month ago when I gave this talk at Google. So we have even more than this. Now, right after people do the setup, we ask them to authenticate. Now you might argue that's meaningless, because people of course will even remember what they wrote. This is not testing their preferences, this is testing short-term memory. This is the threshold we require to get access to the system, and this is the distribution. Why did we do that? To catch cheaters. Because if you give meaningless answers, you're not going to remember what the meaningless answers are. So when we perform the experiments, we have to be concerned with people who don't take it seriously. We know in the real world, people aren't going to give dumb answers to these questions, just picking at random, because they know that they're not going to get access to their account if they need to. We need to force people to be serious. You can't force people to be serious by holding a gun to their head and saying, do it as you should. But instead, you try to detect cheating. So there are no cheating of this kind, surprisingly. People didn't just click away and work to get done. But then we checked that. And here's a quick look at some of the experiments. Here are two categories. You like folk music? 36% say yes, I like it. 34% say no, I dislike it. And about 30% express no opinion. That's the third choice. You don't select it. You say no opinion. Whereas for jazz, 47% say yes, I like it, and 25% say no, I don't like it. What question is best for our purpose? Folk. It's almost identical probability. It means that if you have folk listed as something you have an opinion about, my chances of guessing it correctly slightly more, not much more than 50%. Whereas jazz music, it's not so good. 47 versus 25%. For the same reason, it's good for us to ask if people like dogs, but it's bad to ask if it's good to ask if people like cats, but it's bad to ask if people like dogs, turns out. There are lots of cat haters out there. Most people are, indifferent to dogs or like dogs. There are not many dog haters. We learn interesting facts. And here's the chart of entropy. This is the degree of surprise for the different questions. You can see most of them have, not quite 1 bit of entropy. 1 bit is the best you could hope for, because it's a yes-no, like or dislike. About 0.7. And then there's some that are awful. Horrible. Going to bookstores is one of them. 95% of all women like to go to bookstores. 90% of all men like to go to bookstores, probably because that's where the women are. So, not a good question. Those are the questions we want to remove, of course. Then you look at correlation. You see some of these questions, the answers to them are very highly correlated. It shouldn't come as a surprise that being into politics and liking to go to political rallies, those are two highly correlated things. we didn't think of that, so we didn't really remove things. We just threw a lot of topics in there and asked people to rate them, and then we saw it popped out, and we removed things like that. Flea markets and garage sales, you know, they're not identical, but they're kind of emotionally the same. They're up here. So we want to remove everything that is, you know, just too much similar. So high correlation. Also some with negative correlation. So examples are political events and politics, flea markets and garage sales, art galleries and museums. You know, these are things that if you asked are they similar, you would have to say, yeah, kind of similar. But we didn't do that. We wanted the subjects and their data to say. Easy listening and punk are negatively correlated, not a big surprise maybe. People who like to watch reality shows slightly dislike folk music, it turns out. Then there are great ones. Like if you like to watch reality shows, that doesn't say anything about whether you like motorcycles or not. These are the ones we want to keep, right? We want to keep topics that have no strong correlation to other topics. For topics that are listed here, we want to get rid of at least one of these in the pairs. And the same for those. And that's exactly what we do. So we remove things that have low entropy, we remove things that have bad correlation. This is a heat map of the correlation pair. So, you know, intensive color means yellow, means remove it. And that's what we do. So the experiments show that we get false negatives at almost 0%. We can't measure the false negatives because nobody failed to log in. And that's after authentication test after 2 weeks. Now you might argue that it would be different after 2 years. But this is where we rely on psychologists that say that preferences don't degrade that much. So those who made a mistake probably would have made a mistake immediately because they typed a mistake. Nobody did. And then false positives below 0.5% for this strategic adversary in most of distributions. It turns out with more detailed and careful experiments that I did not report on in this talk, we get even lower. So I started with one flower and with another one. This is a forget-me-not that you can see in the background. Conclusion here is that preferences are not forgotten. They change very slowly. And we can get very low error rates and a practical user interface. Remember I said you don't want to type your mother's maiden name on an iPhone. Definitely not on a normal cell phone. On the other hand, clicking yes or no, like or dislike, is not such a bad experience. You can do that. You can do it even if you're dyslexic or whether your hand is very shaky. It's okay. But you do need orthogonal security measures to begin defend against insiders. These are family members, the ex-boyfriend and ex-girlfriend. And that's typically where mailing somebody a link would come. You could do both. I mail you a link, and if you click on that link, then you have to answer not 16 questions, but maybe 8. If you can't click on the link because you don't have access to that account anymore, well then you have to answer all 16 questions. You could have trade-offs like this. So here in almost unreadable color, if you see iforgotmypassword.com, that's describing the techniques and the math behind this. And you could try it at bluemoonauthentication.com. And if you have any questions, you can email me, markusjakobsson@com. Yes?
Now, if I wanted to implement something like this, do you have like resources and questions and stuff I can just grab and use? Or?
We have implemented it, but we'd be happy for you to implement it too. If you want to implement it and use it, that's a slightly different thing because you need to buy a license. But for research purposes, because this is owned by a company. This is
I mean, is it the general technique is patented or?
Yes.
Oh hell!
Yeah.
Why are you even here?
I like you guys. But you could use it for research purposes, and
so this is just not even usable by open source people.
We have offered it for free to nonprofits. But if you are going to go out and make money from it, then you better buy a license.
so it's not usable to open source people.
You could say it like that, yes.
Well, because I mean, for a license to be open source, it can't restrict against commercial usage. So if I write something,
That's true. Yep. But you could open source it, and nobody could use it unless they're a non-profit. But yes, it's a limitation.
wow.
I'm sorry about that. Yes.
So how does this stack up against a cloning website?
It works very well against the cloning website. Let me show you why. Remember that I said the ordering is random. So you want to attack PayPal, say. You know exactly that these are the questions they ask. You set up a website and you ask me to go there. Now, in order for you to be successful and know the answers to my questions, you have to be very lucky. You have to be lucky that I choose exactly the same things for these categories. Now, that might be very, very difficult for you because remember, this list that I'm shown is a subset of all the available ones. You would have to ask me an excessive number of questions. You say, now this time we're not going to do 8 plus 8, we're going to do 120 plus 120, would you please? Now, that means, of course, you'll get the gullible guys. But most people, they would say, no, that doesn't sound like a good thing, and they would stop. But that is, otherwise, of course, you can make people give out all their information. There's also what's called a man-in-the-middle attack, where you go to PayPal, pose as me, get the questions, ask them to me. There are ways to get around that. I don't have time to get into that, but there are ways to defend against that. One more question.
What about those for personality quizzes?
There are personality quizzes out there, and that could be useful, of course, for an attacker. They would have to answer. They would have to ask things that are rather similar to this, and they would have to ask you to rate a large number of topics. And of course, if this becomes commonly used, then that would raise your eyebrows. Why are you asking all these things instead of asking the mother's maiden name as a quiz today? You're saying, no, I don't think I want to participate in this quiz. But yes, that's a problem. You don't have to use preferences only though. It's anything that is a person. That it doesn't, you know, it could be something you're likely to do and not to do, not whether you. Let me not get into that. There are other things that relate to the personality and psychology of the person.
Well, thank you very much.